Greetings and salutations, this is Imperator Vespasian and his trusty sidekick.
Hello.
Before you can see the might of the Polish army for bolt action. This is just the beginning of the Polish army. These are the Polish army cars down the bottom, which you can't really see, so I'm going to move them.
You'll see them plenty doing it one by one.
Yeah, I did think it would look really cool in shot, but it's just a bit rubbish really. So I'll just zoom in on these guys and you can have a good look at them. So these are the Polish, this is the Polish army. Well, what can I say about the Poles? It's not a totally new army. The figures for the Poles did come out shortly before. It's taken us a while to get around to actually getting them and doing them as an army. The army list for the Polish army is in the France and her allies rule book. They're the Poles there, and they're not a bad army. The Poles do get kind of missed out of history a lot. There's a sort of mention that something happened in Poland with Germany and then the war started, which is really not taking out of account the power of the Polish army and its effect on Europe up to the point of the Second World War. Right, so where shall we begin? Where do you want to begin with this army?
Cavalry.
Cavalry. Okay, we'll do a bit about the figures and then we'll do a little bit about the history. How about that?
Okay.
That sound good? Right, the cavalry you can see here, these figures are awesome. They'll put you about £25 for the box, for the set. I just got them from Warlord. The Polish cavalry are using French helmets. I'll go into a lot more detail when we do the actual video on it. Polish cavalry made up a considerable portion of the Polish army. There were quite a few, I think, there were quite a few cavalry regiments. And cavalry was still used as cavalry. Although before you start going, Polish use cavalry, the Germans had more cavalry. The Germans had huge amounts of cavalry. The way the Germans actually got out of cavalry was by capturing lots and lots and lots of Russian armoured cars. And then they swapped from their horses to armoured cars, and that was the beginning of the armoured car regiments, the light panzer regiments. That's where they came from. They were originally cavalry regiments. Skipping forward a little bit, the cavalry had been, skipping back a little bit I should say, the cavalry had been very important for the war against Russia. And so because cavalry had played such a key role in the war against Russia, Poland decided that cavalry was the way of the future, and so they invested a lot into cavalry units. Although the cavalry troops did have lance, they didn't really use it during the war. I think there's only like one occasion when people said they used lance, but they probably weren't, but who knows. Anyway, cavalry units are useful because they enable you to get your troops across the battlefield regardless of terrain and dismount your infantry to fight, which is exactly how the Germans and Russians generally use cavalry. It's a way of making infantry very, very mobile. If you're in a truck, you're stuck on roads, and the half-track had only just been invented at the time, so there weren't many to go around. As the war went on, the Germans put everything into Hanemags, the SDK series. The SDK 251 series, which were basically a universal armoured car used by the Germans. You could fit 12 men inside it, or you could fit guns to it and stuff. So really the Poles haven't got that far. They were still in basically cavalry units. Next thing is, what's next?
Infantry.
Well, the infantry, I got 2 boxes of Polish infantry. You get 15 men in a box. Is it? No, 24 men in a box, I think.
24 metal World War II early war Polish infantry.
Oh, we've got a box here. No, good at this, aren't you? This box, you get the... That's totally out of focus. I'll move it. You get 24 men in each box. The Polish army had the largest sized sections of any army in the war. So the sections were 19 men strong, which is a lot of rifles, and which is a lot of firepower you have to deal with, and they have to take a lot of casualties to actually get defeated. So they're going to be one of the hardest armies to fight, I think. And on infantry level anyway. They don't have like machine guns, but they do have the BAR, which is this chap here. The BAR is basically a rapid fire rifle. Quite useful because it gives you an extra fire point, so technically your infantry unit can fire with 20 dice, which is quite good. Again, we're going to do a video on each individual unit, so we'll go into the history of each unit as we go. Next.
Anti-tank rifle.
Right, you get an anti-tank rifle in each box. You can also buy a set with the anti-tank rifle, mortar and stuff with it. You're going to end up with anti-tank rifles. The Poles had a lot of anti-tank rifles. They went into anti-tank rifles in a big way. So that's the anti-tank rifles. Again, that's going to be another video. Also in the box you get medics, your officers, forward observation and stuff like that. With the forward observation here, I've mounted one with two guys, and that's to represent the artillery observation, and one on his own who is to represent the air observation team, which is quite cool. Yeah. So I'll go into a few special rules, or the special rules for the army. The army has 3 special rules. Most armies have 2. This one has 3, which is quite cool. The first one is communication breakdown. Really, at the beginning of the game, if you choose your order dice, so if whoever picks out of the hat gets your order dice, your enemy can choose to make you put it back and pick another one. This means that... Go on.
What happens if there's only your dice left in there?
No, it's the first turn. It's the first time you pick.
That's unlucky.
Yeah.
That's really annoying.
Yeah. So it's to represent the breakdown of communication due to blitzkrieg. A few points on that. I'm going to be really picky now because that's what I'm like. First of all, the Germans didn't use blitzkrieg in Poland. They hadn't invented it yet. Secondly, the Poles, although they couldn't break the German Enigma code, they actually were the ones who captured an Enigma machine, which is how come we broke the Enigma code in the first place. But they had broken all the German lower codes, the Air Force codes, the Army codes. They'd broken all the codes. They could basically read the German orders. And the only codes they hadn't broken were the Kriegsmarine codes, the German Navy codes. They hadn't broken those because Canaris kept changing them constantly. Because Canaris was a suspicious bar steward. And so you had the Poles, although they couldn't decode high command orders, they could pretty much read everything that the Germans were doing at a lower level. So your specially secretly coded stuff is all nicely coded. Unfortunately, it goes down to the guy who delivers the mail, and the guy who delivers the mail doesn't use the code, he just uses the standard code, which the Poles have broken. So you find out where the mail's going, you find out where the horses are going, you find out where hay's been sent, you find out where the fuel trucks are being stationed, you find out where engineers from organisation Todd have come from to build new airfields. So you could pretty quickly work out what the Germans are actually doing without needing the Enigma code. And also they had their own intelligence as well. They had a couple of spies in German high command. Not high up, but pretty useful. They had a spy in Russia who... Oh, this is a complicated one. Right, the Russians, the Soviets, had a spy in the other high command, in the German high command. And this spy relayed information to the Russians, and the Russians had spies in Britain. Oh god, it's really complex. But basically, the British didn't want to give the Russians intelligence reports. but the Russians had spies in Britain who communicated through Berlin to Russia. This is before the war.
Oh, I was about to say.
This is before the war.
Traitors!
Yeah, basically, Burgess and Philby McLean were Russian spies, and they were giving information via the Berlin office to Russia without, telling the Russians what was going on. So the Poles were intercepting that information as it arrived in Russia because they had a spy in Russia who was relaying the information back to them. So the Poles were reading all the British intelligence reports, all the German intelligence reports, and all the Russian intelligence reports. And so the Poles knew exactly where the entire German army was disposed, whereas the Germans didn't. Now the reason I'm going into this massive explanation is because the Polish army suffers from communication breakdown special rule. In reality, they should go the opposite way around, because the Poles knew where all the German units were. About 90%, they knew where 90% of all they correctly marked them on maps. If you look at wartime maps, the Poles had correctly positioned all the German, about 90% of the German units. The Germans, on the German maps, had got most of the Polish dispositions wrong. They didn't know where the airfields were. They bombed dead airfields, dummy airfields. They bombed dummy barracks. They bombed dummy positions. The Germans really didn't have a clue where the Polish forces were. So it was a huge mess. Anyway, that is a special rule for the army, which is an interesting rule, and it will make games quite fun.
You can tell.
Yeah, I'm going to enjoy that rule. Especially as I'm going to be the one playing Polish, and he's going to have to decide whether or not it's worth letting me move a unit or not. He's going to squirm. Next question. Answer? No. Next rule is no hope of retreat. Okay, I'm not going into massive detail on this one. Basically, if you get a morale test that could destroy the unit, including vehicles, then the unit gets to re-roll, because they've got nowhere to go. These guys aren't exactly fanatics, but they've got nowhere to retreat to. As the Polish High Commander said, with the Germans we'll lose our freedom, but with the Russians we'll lose our soul. They had nowhere to go to. They were absolutely stuffed. They had the Russians attacking them in the rear, they had the Germans attacking them at the front, and they were fighting to the death. They had nowhere to go. Next, the last special rule is elite officer class, which is a very good rule. All HQ units are classed as fanatics, which is the usual rules for fanatics. You know the rules for fanatics. So that would make it an interesting thing to do. The reason the officers were fanatics is because they were all extreme nationalists, which is how Poland got in this situation in the first place. All the officers were very nationalist. The Prime Minister was could have been termed a fascist, if it weren't for the fact that Mussolini and Hitler had already nicked the word. But today we'd call him a fascist. The Americans would call him a conservative. But he was ultra right wing, but he was right wing in a pro-Poland sort of way. He led Poland to stealing part of Latvia, or was it Estonia? One of them. One of the Baltic states he invaded. Poland also invaded Czechoslovakia. They also stole a bit of Romania as well. When Russia took Bessarabia, the Poles went over and took a bit of territory off of the Romanians. So yeah, the Poles, and of course the Poles are moving further towards Germany. They wanted to cut Danzig off and close the Danzig corridor. So Poland was not a victim in all of this. Poland was very belligerent.
No, Poland was an antagonist.
He was an antagonist, yes. Well done. Did you do that at school?
No.
You just thought of it?
Yeah.
Well done. So Poland was an antagonist. At one side, at the back, they've got Russia. The biggest threat to Poland was Russia. At the other side, you've got Germany, which Poland didn't particularly like. When Hitler came to power, the Polish government went to the British and French governments and said, "Hey, let's invade Germany." And the French said, "You warmongering people, stop doing that now." And later on the French went, damn, should have done it then. So Poland wanted to annex Germany, basically. The Poles' idea was to split Germany down the middle and Poland take half of it and France take the other half. Which would have made Poland the most powerful country in Europe. And today we'll be talking about the Second World War, when Poland defeated the Allied powers and then crushed Russia. So it's, yeah. Militarily, the Polish army was huge. It was vast. It was an enormous army. A total of about 5 million men in arms, 3 million fully trained and equipped men, although at the time of the outbreak of the war, only 1,600 men were actually in uniform, because it kind of took them by surprise. They didn't have time to mobilise fully. Had they mobilised fully, it's quite likely they'd have beaten the Germans, because they did do particularly well against the Germans. They shot down a considerable amount of German aircraft. They did appalling damage to German armour. About a third of all German tanks were knocked out by the Poles. Handy if the Germans are riding around in little dinky tanks made of tin. It's quite easy to take them out, really. But yeah, the Poles did very well. And of course, all the German tanks tended to break down a lot. And when you break down, the Poles will just run up to it and set it on fire. The Polish army was pretty good. So it was a huge army, very powerful, very good artillery, very good aircraft. If it wasn't for the Messerschmitts, the Germans would probably have had a far worse time in the air. The Russians, even though Germany had been fighting the Poles for the best part of a couple of weeks, and the Poles had already lost a lot of aircraft, the Russians lost loads of aircraft. Because the Russian army was pretty much, well, it was a huge but naff, and the Russian planes were shot out of the sky like a turkey shoot. So that took the Russians by surprise.
No.
And I'll get on to partisan warfare in a minute, but that's that overview. So now on to the next part, which is Polish equipment. The Polish had a decent amount of tanks, not a huge amount, but the TP was certainly as good as anything the Germans had. And in fact, the best tank the Germans had for the invasion of Poland was the crappy little Czechoslovakian PZT, 38T, which is a tiny little tank with a tiny little anti-tank gun. And that's basically the best tank the Germans had. Most of the German tanks were glorified armoured cars on tracks. There were the Panzer I, the Panzer II, a lot of armoured cars, and all they are is basically trucks with either tracks fitted or wheels with armour fitted, and they weren't that good. The Poles could easily take the Germans on gun for gun. However, the Poles were extremely outnumbered as far as tanks were concerned. So they had to resort to the anti-tank rifle, which is why I said I'd get onto it. And the anti-tank rifle really came into its own fighting against the Germans. The Poles relied heavily on the anti-tank rifle, and for good reason. It's a good weapon. And in bolt action, the good thing about bolt action, I love bolt action, is the anti-tank rifle is actually really good. It's got a +2 armor penetration, and we've discussed this in videos before. I can never say how good an anti-tank rifle is for early war games. Of course, the British anti-tank rifle is the best, but that's just because we're British. Aircraft. I've already mentioned the aircraft were actually quite good. They just didn't have very many of them. The Poles also had armoured trains, and I am contemplating building an armoured train because I think that would be really interesting to play with, and you can use it in so many different situations as well. What do you think?
Yeah, you can. So.
Yeah, an armoured train would be quite fun. Okay, so now I'll get on to the combat doctrine. So the Pole had a grand battle plan, and they back in the 1920s, Russia invaded Poland, and Poland won by withdrawing in front of the Russians right up to Warsaw itself, allowing the Russians to get all the way into Poland, and then the Polish cavalry came around both sides of the Russian army, cut the Russian army in half and destroy the Russian army, the Soviet army. And that was basically bye-bye time for the Soviet invasion. And it stopped Bolshevism overrunning Europe, which kind of saved Europe at the time. So we can thank the Poles for Europe not falling to the communists, which is quite good. Had the Poles lost that war, then Poland would have fallen to the communists. Germany was a shattered ruin at the time. This is before Hitler was elected, so Germany was already pretty left-wing. So Germany would have gone over to the communists. There was a rebellion in Germany where the communists seized power for a few days, and they had to be put down nicely by the Free Corps, who basically ex-soldiers who came out of retirement to beat up communists, which is always a good thing to do. I think we could do more of that in Britain today. So Germany would have fallen to the communists. France was already pretty lefty, and they didn't have any population particularly, so they would have fallen. So really, the utopian dream of Marxism would have been recognised had it not been for the damn Poles, those glorious Polish soldiers who literally did fight to the death to defend Poland from the invasion of the Soviet Union, and they defeated them. They won, and that was a good thing. Now we go into the Second World War. So the Poles had learnt a lot from the First War, and as you hear, whenever you fight a war, the generals always plan for the last war, not for the one they're about to fight. So the Polish Grand Battle Plan was to withdraw in front of the Germans all the way to the Romanian Redoubt, which was a defensive area where the Poles stored all their ammunition and food and all that sort of stuff for their army. And and also, if they were ever taken by surprise in an attack, then all the Polish soldiers who went to the army were ordered to make their way as civilians to the redoubt and then pick up their equipment and stuff there, so then they could fight. And that was the grand tactic plan. And the idea was you would withdraw to the Romanian redoubt, fight the Germans all the way, giving them a bloody nose any opportunity you get. And once you get the Germans in place, the French would come in the rear and invade Germany from the rear. And possibly the British would invade Germany from the rear. The Germans would then be rolled back by the Polish army, and Poland would invade Germany. That was their grand tactical plan. Had one problem to it. It was bollocks. Because the Poles were very afraid that, given that Herr Hitler, the chap in charge of Germany at the time, kept saying all he wanted was the Danzig corridor secured, which was basically a road to German territory in Prussia, Pomerania. What if the Germans invaded Poland, took the Danzig corridor, and then said the war's over, and never actually invaded the rest of Poland? What would Poland do then?
Invade Germany.
Well, France. If Germany invaded Poland, took the Danzig corridor, and then said war's over, we've got everything we want, we're not going to fight anymore, France would be very, very hard pressed to actually invade Germany at this point, and Britain probably too also. And that would have left the Poles fighting on their own, with Germany holding the Danzig corridor, and it would be embarrassing for the Poles, and maybe they'd have to negotiate with the Germans rather than fight them. And so the Poles decided to abandon their original redoubt strategy and spread their units out into the gap between Prussia and Poland. And so they had to change their military doctrine right on the eve of war. And it's always a mistake to have planned for a war, spent the last 15 years planning for a particular war, and then suddenly say, no, we're going to do it completely different. Reposition all your units, and then suddenly the Germans attack. So that did really throw the Polish planners out, because all the plans they had didn't really help them when the Germans invaded. So that is an important point to make about the Poles. But on the table, I should guess the Poles will do very well against both the Germans and the Russians. So I am looking forward to some games with these. They're my little pet army. I love them. I think they're great. So do you want to ask any of those pesky questions you often have?
About what?
Anything.
There's anything.
about the Polish army. Come on, this is the initial video for the Polish army, so we're going to go into way more detail on each of the individual units, plus all the other units we're going to be getting, because we're going to add to this considerably as we go on. The Polish army is huge, we're going to make it really cool. So I want to hear words fall out of your head. Questions, do you have any? You're usually a barrel of questions all the time. Come on, questions, any? Well, that's useless, isn't it? So I think that's more or less the end of the video. You usually have really clever questions at this point. What's up with you?
Right, okay, got some questions. I had anything like zoned out.
Which is your favourite Pokemon?
Okay. I thought in World War I they started to use armoured cars at the very end of World War I. How come at the beginning of World War II they were still using cavalry?
Because of the war with Russia. I get what you mean. Yeah. You do know that Russia invaded Poland.
Yes. Yes.
Russia invaded Poland in the 1920s, and the Poles really didn't stand a chance against this massive Soviet army. So they decided to allow the Russians to advance to Warsaw. I'm going to explain that. But what they found was they had a lot of cavalry, and their cavalry were able to get behind the Russians, whereas the Russians were stuck on roads. They had to use roads to get around, so they had to drive down the roads. The cavalry could go off-road and could go across the countryside. You see, Poland is basically a huge flat plain. There's a few hills and some rivers. There's nothing really defensible. So you've got a large amount of area which is very hard to defend, but you have mobile units. So your cavalry is very mobile. Your cavalry can ride behind the enemy, ride anywhere you want. Cavalry are very versatile. So your cavalry are very useful. Which is why throughout the Second World War, most armies, bar Britain, still use cavalry for police duty. So for rear units, you had a lot of cavalry units to carry out anti-partisan work and stuff like that. So because the cavalry can go off-road, they can go anywhere. They don't need fuel. Horses don't need fuel, they just need hay, and that's quite easy to get hold of in a country that is covered in farms with massive hay bales everywhere. And they found that cavalry were just way more useful. So although the Poles did have a lot of armoured cars, they had the Ursus armoured car, and there was another version of armoured car they had as well. Those armoured cars again have to stick to roads, whereas the cavalry can go off-road. And they didn't learn, they learned the lessons of the last war, and so they tried to fight the Second World War with the same principles as the last war they fought. In the same way that Britain and France tried to fight the war in a trench. What did we do the moment war was declared? We said, great, we're at war with Germany, build a trench and let's sit in it and wait for the Germans to attack, and then when they've attacked we'll attack them, and then they'll attack us, and we'll attack. Our generals were thinking World War I again, because they hadn't learned. The Germans actually had learned. They actually listened to their junior officers, people like Rommel and Guderian. They listened to people who had experience in Spain, where Spain never devolved into trench warfare, because most of it is open ground, and it was a more fluid war. And you had junior German officers driving around in armoured cars and doing stuff there, who were able to report back and say, hey, this sort of stuff works. Tanks are actually really useful, you can use them to assault. And the Germans learned from it, the Poles didn't. So the Poles still were heavily cavalry mounted. Massive amount of cavalry. Although Russia had far more cavalry than Poland, but I'm not going to argue about that.
Russia's huge.
Yeah, so did Germany. Germany had huge amounts of cavalry, although the Germans never fought from horseback. And the Russians did. And the Polish did. So, there you go. Next question? That's another one of those long silences. Oh, you're choking. You're actually choking to death. That's great. Don't drink while answering questions. Asking questions. It's bad for you.
How come the Polish army had medics at the front line.
All armies have medics at the front line.
Okay, next question.
I just put the medic there. All armies have medics. Your medics are useful in bolt action because they allow you to cure troops who may well be dead, who may otherwise have been dead or at least out of action. As with all gaming rules, when a figure is removed as a casualty, he's not necessarily dead. Only 1 in 3 soldiers on average died if they were casualties. So for every dead soldier, you've got 2 wounded who simply can't fight. And they may fight again another day, but that's another story, and that's what you field medics for. And I've got one here. We've got 2 in the box, but one of them I've made the ammunition carrier for the other sniper rifle. Because I've got 3 medics in total. So I've got too many medics. I'm not going to use 3 medics. May as well use them as a loader. Next question?
Well, there was going to be a next question, but you already answered it.
What was that?
The larger unit.
Yeah, very large infantry units. I don't know why the Polish army units were so large. Honestly, I haven't got a clue. But they were very large units. 19-man units were huge. Same for the mechanised. Although the mechanised broke down into 2 sections, whereas so the mechanised infantry, the guys who wear German hats, they broke down into 2 rifle sections, whereas this unit broke down into 2 units of 6 and 1 unit of 7. So it had like 3 rifle sections. Sorry, it's that 19-man unit is a rifle section. And the rifle squad, it broke down into 3 sections, effectively. So there's 2 corporals who are there, and I'll put them in the back rank there. So I've got 2 corporals, 1 officer, so you can break the squad down into 3 individual smaller units in combat. So you can actually break the squad down. There's no reason you can't do that. But it does make them quite hard to fight because they're going to be very, very large units to actually kill.
Unless you give me a machine gun.
Well, even with a machine gun, the best casualties you can get is 3. And
I'm talking about a tank.
Oh yeah, your tanks. If you're using Germans, you could do considerable damage. If you're using Russians, it depends what you're using.
But it would be hard for strafing with planes.
Yeah, that'd be good for strafing.
It would be harder.
How do you mean?
More hits to make a unit break.
Yes, it will take more hits to actually kill the unit. But, yeah. Yeah, so we'll have to see how it turns out in battle. We'll have to play a few games of it with this army and see how they turn out. So, it's still up in the air. We will let you know how it goes. In fact, we'll film it. We'll film our first playtest, shall we?
Okay.
Right. That's the end of the video.
Yeah, I suppose.
Over to you.
So if you enjoyed this video, please leave a like and subscribe, and comment down below what you think of this new Polish army, and because we will be doing individual videos on these, which ones you'd like to see first.
Right, so...
That's everything from me.
And everything from him.
Bye.